$240 million. That is not a typo. That is not an estimate pulled from a projection model or rounded up for headlines. That is the exact figure federal prosecutors confirmed was laundered through a network of fake shipping manifests, ghost freight companies, and falsified customs declarations operating out of a single warehouse district in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the man who allegedly authorized every dollar of it was not hiding in a tunnel beneath the Sonoran Desert. He was sitting in a government office, signing ordinances, shaking hands at fundraisers, and smiling for cameras. His name, fictional, but his kind is very real, was Mayor Leonard Dahl. And when the FBI and ICE finally kicked in the doors of his operation, what they found inside was not just a crime, it was an empire. This is the story of how the Sinaloa cartel buried itself so deeply into the heartland of America that it turned Minnesota's logistics corridor into a narcotics superhighway. How a corrupt mayor became the cartel's most valuable American asset, and how a single early morning raid exposed a conspiracy so vast it required over 800 federal agents to dismantle. And the truth is, even that may not have been enough, because every layer they peeled back revealed something worse underneath. Every file they cracked open pointed somewhere higher, and every arrest raised the same sickening question. How long had this been running while everyone looked the other way? Stay with this one. It goes deeper than you think. At 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, the streets of northeast Minneapolis were dead silent. A thin frost had settled over cracked asphalt and loading dock concrete. Sodium vapor lamps cast their sick orange glow across rows of corrugated steel buildings, the kind of faceless warehouses that move 10,000 pallets a week and nobody ever asks what is inside. Fog drifted low off the Mississippi, curling between chain-link fences and idling refrigerator trucks. Somewhere, a train horn moaned, distant and hollow. Then, the silence broke. 12 armored SWAT vehicles rolled in from 3 directions simultaneously, their headlights killed, engines growling low. Behind them came unmarked SUVs carrying FBI tactical teams, ICE Homeland Security Investigations agents, and DEA rapid response units. Overhead, 2 Black Hawk helicopters swept in from the south, their rotors thumping against the fog, searchlights cutting white columns through the dark. A DHS drone squadron had already been circling for 45 minutes, feeding thermal imaging to the mobile command post parked 6 blocks east behind an abandoned grain elevator. The targets were 4 warehouses on Lowry Avenue, a freight brokerage office on Central Avenue, and a residential property in the suburb of Brooklyn Park. Federal agents hit all 6 simultaneously. At Warehouse 7, the primary target, a 12-man FBI tactical unit breached the main loading bay with a ram and 2 flashbang grenades. The concussive blasts lit up the interior like strobes at a nightmare. Inside, agents found not crates of machine parts or frozen produce, as the shipping labels claimed. They found 17 pallets shrink-wrapped in black plastic, each containing vacuum-sealed bricks of cocaine, over 3 tons in total. In a refrigerated section marked perishable dairy, DEA agents uncovered 1.8 million fentanyl pills, pressed to look like prescription oxycodone, stacked in coolers alongside actual milk cartons. The pills alone carried enough lethal dosage to kill every man, woman, and child in the state of Minnesota twice over. At Warehouse 12 across the rail yard, ICE agents found something arguably worse. Behind a false wall built to look like insulation panels, a narrow corridor led into a climate-controlled room running industrial-grade pill presses, digital scales, packaging equipment, and chemical precursors for manufacturing methamphetamine. It was a super lab, not in the desert, not in a cartel compound south of the border, in Minneapolis. Operating, by the looks of the chemical residue and production logs agents recovered, for at least 19 months. 4 suspects were detained on scene, 2 Mexican nationals on expired visas, 1 American logistics worker, and a night shift supervisor who tried to flee through a back door with a duffel bag containing $312,000 in banded cash and a satellite phone loaded with encrypted messaging applications. He did not get far. A SWAT officer put him on the pavement before he reached the fence. But it was the freight brokerage office on Central Avenue that delivered the real blow. When FBI financial crimes agents entered, the staff had already begun shredding documents. 3 commercial shredders were running. 2 laptops were in the process of being wiped. Agents seized everything: hard drives, external storage devices, a fireproof safe bolted into the floor, and 14 filing cabinets stuffed with shipping manifests, customs declarations, and invoices. And behind the office manager's desk, inside a locked steel drawer, they found a leather-bound ledger, handwritten, coded, cross-referenced to dates, dollar amounts, and initials. One set of initials appeared on nearly every page: LD. That discovery changed everything. By 9 a.m. the same morning, the seized electronics were already inside the FBI's Regional Cyber Forensics Lab in a federal building in downtown St. Paul. The atmosphere in that lab was clinical, fluorescent, and very quiet. Analysts wearing latex gloves handled the hard drives like surgical instruments. Within hours, the encryption on the primary server was broken. What appeared on screen made 3 seasoned investigators stand up from their chairs. The network had a name. Internally, the cartel's American logistics operation was designated Proyecto Hielo, Project Ice. Not a reference to methamphetamine, but to Minnesota itself, the frozen corridor, the last place anyone would look for a cartel distribution hub. And the architecture of the operation was staggering. 14 shell companies had been registered across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and the Dakotas. They had names like North Star Freight Solutions, Prairie Cold Chain Logistics, Great Lakes Agricultural Transport, and Heartland Green Distribution. Each company existed primarily on paper, with minimal employees, rented office space, and just enough legitimate freight traffic to avoid suspicion. But woven through their books were hundreds of falsified shipments: invoices for frozen beef, organic grain, dairy equipment, solar panel components that corresponded to no real product movement. Instead, these phantom shipments generated wire transfers between domestic accounts and offshore banking entities in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and the British Virgin Islands. Money flowed out of Minneapolis and came back clean, laundered through layers of fake invoicing, re-invoicing, and a technique federal prosecutors call trade-based money laundering. $240 million over a span of roughly 2 years, flowing through the veins of the American shipping industry as if it were nothing more than the cost of doing business. But the digital forensics revealed more than financial engineering. They revealed command structure. Encrypted communications recovered from the satellite phone and cross-referenced with server metadata traced operational directives back to a single authorization key, a digital signature embedded in every major logistical decision, every large fund transfer, and every route modification for inbound narcotics shipments. That key was linked to a private encrypted email account, and that email account, through a chain of warrants and subpoenas that took FBI analysts deep into service provider records, was registered to a device owned by Leonard Dahl, the sitting mayor of a mid-sized Minnesota city whose jurisdiction included the warehouse district, and whose political office had quietly expedited zoning permits, waived inspections, and blocked code enforcement actions against the very buildings the cartel was using. This was not corruption. This was command-level collusion. A sitting American mayor had effectively converted his city's industrial zone into a cartel logistics base, and he had done it with permits, paperwork, and a smile. And the operation was not finished. It was only beginning. At 5 a.m. the following Thursday, 12 days after the initial raids, a unified federal command center activated inside a National Guard armory near Fort Snelling. The room was enormous, Concrete floors, steel rafters, and a wall-sized digital display glowing with a map of Minnesota and 5 surrounding states. Red markers pulsed across that map like a disease spreading. Each marker represented a confirmed node in the Proyecto Hielo network. There were 47 of them. The operation was designated Frozen Harvest, and it was the largest coordinated federal law enforcement action in the history of the Upper Midwest. Over 800 agents from the FBI, DEA, ICE, DHS, and U.S. Marshals Service deployed in synchronized strike teams across 9 cities. SWAT teams in Minneapolis, tactical units in St. Paul, Duluth, Rochester, and Mankato, arrest teams in Fargo, Sioux Falls, Des Moines, and Milwaukee. Black Hawk helicopters from a National Guard aviation unit provided aerial support and rapid extraction capability. Armored vehicles blocked highway on-ramps. U.S. Coast Guard cutters positioned on Lake Superior interdicted 2 commercial vessels suspected of transporting precursor chemicals through the Great Lakes shipping lanes. In Duluth, DEA agents raided a cold storage facility operating under a seafood import license. Inside, they found 42 kilograms of heroin concealed in frozen fish crates and another 600,000 fentanyl pills hidden in pallets of packaged wild rice. In Rochester, FBI agents arrested the owner of a chain of 4 restaurants that had been washing cartel money through inflated food supply invoices for over a year. In a suburb of Des Moines, ICE agents uncovered a human trafficking transit house, a rented 5-bedroom home where 14 undocumented migrants, including 3 minors, were being held under guard and forced to work as drug couriers in exchange for the promise of immigration documents that would never come. The conditions inside that house were described in the federal affidavit as inhumane. Near the South Dakota border, a joint FBI and DEA team intercepted a convoy of 3 semi-trucks traveling in formation along Interstate 90. The trucks were registered to one of the 14 shell companies. Their manifests said they were hauling agricultural irrigation equipment. They were hauling methamphetamine, over 700 pounds of it, concealed inside hollow irrigation pipes sealed with resin and designed to pass any standard roadside inspection. The street value was estimated at over $30 million. By noon that day, Frozen Harvest had resulted in 119 arrests. Agents had seized 4.7 tons of narcotics, including cocaine, heroin, fentanyl pills, and methamphetamine. They had seized over $61 million in cash and assets, including real estate, vehicles, and commercial equipment. They had shut down 3 drug superlabs, dismantled 2 human trafficking pipelines, and frozen 23 bank accounts tied to the shell company network. The cartel's Upper Midwest infrastructure took more damage in 9 hours than it had sustained in the previous 5 years combined. But the most devastating discoveries were still coming. When investigators began examining internal communications pulled from the seized servers during the days that followed, a sickening pattern emerged. Mayor Leonard Dahl had not merely facilitated the cartel, he had recruited for it. Over 17 months, at least 22 local and state law enforcement officers across 4 jurisdictions had been compromised. Some were bribed outright, cash payments of between $10,000 and $50,000 routed through a sham charity called the Minnesota Community Resilience Fund, which Dahl's office had helped incorporate. Others were coerced through blackmail. A few were simply cartel associates who had been placed into law enforcement positions through falsified background checks that Dahl's political allies helped push through. The compromised officers had performed specific functions. Patrol schedules near the warehouse district were altered so that during peak narcotics transfer windows, usually between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. on weeknights, no squad cars operated within a 6-block radius. Way station inspectors along key interstate routes were told that certain truck plate numbers had already been cleared by a federal program that did not exist. Tips about suspicious activity near the warehouses were flagged in dispatch systems and quietly buried. And on at least 3 occasions, information about planned DEA surveillance operations was leaked to cartel handlers through burner phones, allowing shipments to be rerouted before agents could act. Honest officers who had filed reports or raised concerns found their paperwork lost, their shifts changed, and their promotions blocked. One patrol sergeant, a 15-year veteran named in the federal complaint only as Officer M.R., later told investigators that she had flagged unusual after-hours truck traffic at Warehouse 7 twice in 6 months. Both reports vanished from the system. Her supervisor told her to focus on her assigned beat and stop asking questions. That supervisor was later arrested as part of Frozen Harvest. He had received over $170,000 from the Shell network over 14 months. Federal agents ultimately arrested 9 active-duty officers, 2 retired officers working as private security consultants for the Shell companies, a county court clerk who had been altering records related to freight company registrations, and 3 administrative staff from Dahl's own municipal office. The FBI's assistant director overseeing the case later said in a sealed briefing that what they had uncovered was not a few bad actors, but a parallel enforcement structure, a second shadow police force whose loyalty ran not to the people of Minnesota, but to the Sinaloa Cartel. The badge had been hollowed out from the inside, and rebuilding it would take years. But the map was not finished. Analysts working around the clock in the weeks following Frozen Harvest traced the Proyecto Hielo supply chain far beyond the upper Midwest. The logistics network connected south through Kansas City and Memphis to cartel-controlled crossing points along the Texas border. It extended east through Chicago's freight rail systems to distribution cells in Detroit and Cleveland. It reached north through trucking routes into Winnipeg, Canada. And the financial pipeline, the Laundered millions, flowed through Panama, the Cayman Islands, and eventually into investment accounts in Dubai and Singapore. Minnesota was not a target of opportunity. It was chosen deliberately. The state's position as a major freight and agricultural hub, its relatively low law enforcement density outside the Twin Cities, and the sheer volume of legitimate truck traffic along its interstate corridors made it the perfect place to hide cartel operations in plain sight. The Sinaloa Cartel had studied American logistics the way a general studies terrain before an invasion. They understood that the best place to move contraband is not through a checkpoint. It is through a system so overwhelmed with legitimate commerce that no one has the manpower to look twice at a pallet of frozen beef or a crate of irrigation equipment. The final file recovered from Mayor Dahl's encrypted correspondence was a strategic planning document, a 5-year projection for expanding the Proyecto Hielo network into a permanent, self-sustaining narcotics and money laundering corridor stretching from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. The document outlined plans to acquire additional commercial real estate, incorporate more Shell logistics companies, place additional compromised personnel into law enforcement and regulatory agencies, and establish what the document called a durable political shield, a network of elected and appointed officials whose careers would depend on cartel money and whose silence would be guaranteed by mutual complicity. Minnesota was not supposed to be a waypoint. It was supposed to become the permanent northern headquarters for Sinaloa cartel operations on American soil, a shadow state within a state, governed not by law, but by product and profit. That document chilled federal investigators more than any seizure they had made, because it showed them something they already feared but had never seen laid out so clearly on paper. The cartel was not just infiltrating the system, it was redesigning the system, rebuilding it from the inside so that the infrastructure of American government, American commerce, and American law enforcement would serve cartel interests as a default function, not an exception. The corruption was not a bug, it was the architecture. Leonard Dahl was arrested at his home at 6:14 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, 19 days after the initial raid. He did not resist. He did not speak. He was escorted out of a 4-bedroom colonial home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, past a row of federal vehicles and a small group of neighbors who stood on their porches in bathrobes, watching in silence. Here is what remains when the indictments are filed and the press conferences end. Here is what the numbers cannot capture. Fentanyl pills pressed in a Minneapolis warehouse killed people. They killed teenagers in small towns across Wisconsin and Iowa who thought they were buying prescription painkillers. They killed a father of 3 in Rochester who relapsed after 2 years of recovery. They killed a college student in Duluth who took half a pill at a party and never woke up. Every brick of cocaine seized, every pound of methamphetamine pulled from a hollow pipe, every dollar laundered through a ghost company, behind all of it are real people whose lives were shattered or erased entirely so that money could move and power could grow. And the hardest truth of all is this: power does not always arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives with a permit, a handshake, a rezoning application, a quiet word to the right person at the right time. The most dangerous thing about the corruption exposed in Minnesota was not that it was brutal. It was that it was boring. It hid inside bureaucracy. It dressed in business casual. It filed its paperwork on time. That is the warning buried inside this story. Not that cartels are powerful, everyone knows that, but that they are patient. They study systems. They find weaknesses not in walls, but in people. And when they find the right person in the right office willing to look the other way for the right price, they do not just move drugs through a city. They move into it. They become part of it. And by the time anyone notices, the architecture has already been rewritten. If you watched this far, you understand something most people do not. Share this so others see it too. And remember, this story is fictional, a dramatization built from the patterns and realities of cartel infiltration in America. But the world it describes is not fiction at all.